Hi everyone, this is Bill, one of the Cryptid Brothers, coming to you from Tulsa, Oklahoma. We really appreciate you clicking on tonight's episode. We've got lots to talk about, some really terrifying encounters, and the gentleman that called us from the Portland, Oregon area, he didn't want his voice recorded, so we respect that fully, so that's why I'm narrating the story. And if you've had an encounter, please call us, email us. You can email us at cryptidbrothersinvestigations@gmail.com, or you can call us at 1-866-306-8085. And so our website's coming up very soon. We've talked about that. Got lots of cool things on it. You're not going to want to miss it. We'll keep you updated when that's up and running. It should be soon, hopefully here the next week or two. Rob, our sculptor, he's got some really cool things that he's coming out with that, some of you may have seen already. So we're really excited about that. And so stay tuned. We'll keep you posted on that. Again, I just want to say thank you so much for listening and subscribing. It really means a lot to us. We put a lot of hard work into providing and really working hard to give you some of the best cryptid encounters that you're going to hear on the internet, bar none. That's our goal. And we don't take it lightly. So we're just going to keep working and working to produce some of the most mind-blowing episodes that you're going to hear. And that's our goal. So we'll just jump right in. And so, like I said, Gary, he called us from the Portland, Oregon area. And he's a 61-year-old gentleman. He's a longtime hunter and outdoorsman. He's been hunting ever since he was knee-high to a grasshopper. And he became very interested, to say the least, in Bigfoot after last hunting season, when he had two violent Bigfoot encounters all in the same outing. He told me that sometimes he ventures into the deep woods of Oregon, sometimes for like 5 days plus, by himself. Of course, carrying all of his supplies, and which includes his .45 caliber pistol and his bow. And he's a big-time elk hunter. And he began our interview by telling me of a Bigfoot encounter that happened to his brother-in-law in 1969, and then a separate encounter that a friend of his experienced along with his grandson. And then he goes on into telling me of his own encounter that, again, happened just last fall. So it's just amazing. Some of these encounters, when we listen to these, we just sit back and like go, wow. I mean, it's just crazy. And we thank Gary. And Gary, we thank you for sharing your story. We really appreciate it. He said that in the state of Oregon, that it's some of the most desolate, thick forest that you'll ever find, probably on the face of the earth, at least in some areas of Oregon. Lots of creeks and rivers, just everywhere. He said the entire area is basically a rainforest. And he said that 1 year back in the 1990s, it actually rained for like 350 days straight. So, man, that's just amazing. But to lay the foundation of his story regarding his brother-in-law, Gary's sister married Ed. And Gary described Ed as a physically imposing man. Ed was like 6'3", 280 pounds. And Ed's family had camped in a particular area of Northern California near a certain lake, which I'll not disclose, for generations. And the elder men of the family told the whole entire family never to go into a certain area of this location that they camped at every year. But no one knew why. They just said, okay, and no one ever did. And Gary had always accompanied the family to the camping grounds, but 1 year, due to some scheduling conflicts, he couldn't go. But the following year, he was prepared to go, and so but for whatever reason, the trip got canceled. And so Gary was wondering why that was. So he asked his sister, well, why did we cancel the trip? And so she goes on to explain to him that Ed, before he died, described a terrifying Bigfoot encounter that he never told anyone until he was literally on his deathbed, and only then to his wife. That the camping cancellation was because of what Ed experienced the year Gary couldn't go. And so she said that her and Ed decided to venture up the creek exactly where the elders of the family had told and warned no one to go. But they did anyway. They wanted to catch some trout, so they came to a waterfall that was about 12 feet high. So they adventured up this creek and came to the waterfall, and there was a pool at the bottom of this waterfall, and crystal clear trout everywhere. She said she started fishing. Actually, she just immediately caught one, and of course, about that time, Ed was making his way up to higher ground, trying to see if there was what was above the waterfall, and he found a even bigger pool of water there, with again just filled with trout. And so she said that he made his way up there, and she continued to fish. And within a few minutes later, he's stumbling back and just pale. She said that what happened was, and what he told her on his deathbed, is that when he made his way up to the higher ground where this pool of water was, he was very excited. He was getting his gear ready. He drops one of his lures. And when he bends down, he's noticing that there's all these prints along the water's edge. And he's like, what's up with that? So Gary was telling me that Ed actually, he wore a size 13 Triple E boot. But what Ed did is he stepped in the print, and he told his wife that these prints were about twice as big as his boot. And so immediately when he did this, he felt like he was being stared at. So he's facing the pond, or this small body of water, and he feels like he's being watched. So he turns around, and what he sees in the timber just feet away is 8 to 9, quote, hairy men staring at him with disgusted looks. Disgusted is what he described, that they just were so disgusted at him. And they were standing there. He described to his wife that they actually dwarfed him. They didn't approach him. They didn't growl, but he knew immediately they wanted him out of there just by the posture and their facial expression. He had to get the hell out of there. He knew it. So he backed away and left all his fishing equipment there. And he made his way back down from the higher ground toward where his sister was fishing. And she says that he hurried by saying, we've got to go, we've got to go. Never explaining what was going on, just that we got to go. And he just kind of took off. And she's like, what's going on there? What? And so she figured it was a bear. She didn't know, but she followed his lead. Now, mind you, they were actually about 2 miles away from the camp on foot. And so once she arrived back at camp, just a few minutes after Ed, everyone was packed up and no one knew why, as Ed just told everyone to pack up their gear. And they left the area. And Ed never returned to that area again. And he never told anyone about his experience except to his wife on his deathbed. Now, I can't imagine what Ed felt looking up, not expecting to see what he saw, simply having a very peaceful outing, enjoying the beauty of nature while fishing, and suddenly the peace vanishing into the fear of seeing 8 to 9 towering Bigfoot looking down at him with disgusted looks. An unforgettable event in this man's life that he literally took to his deathbed. And so much can be discussed from this encounter. So many times do we hear of stories of people feeling like they're being watched in the woods. More relatable to most folks isn't an experience like this while out in the woods, of course, but it happens in our everyday lives, right? So, you look up and you see someone looking at you. It's really not a conscious thought to look up, but by reflex, you immediately look up and you find yourself making eye contact with someone. How did you know they were looking at you? There's a certain energy that can't necessarily be classified or understood to explain this fully, in my opinion. To think that Ed actually saw that many Bigfoot with looks to kill obviously had a profound impact on his life by the fact that he held on to his story to almost take it to his grave. Points to the reality that people are profoundly impacted by these cryptid encounters. And it's no joke. That's why we do what we do here at Cryptid Brothers Investigations of Oklahoma. We listen, we respect. These people are profoundly impacted. And so I asked Gary if he had been told by the sister of any other further details, and he said he hadn't. Of course, on a story like that, but obviously what's the more important point there is that the man was dying. But one thing that he did is at least to get it off his chest, and that was important to him. He felt he needed to do that. And so Gary then went on to talk about his friend who was a Vietnam veteran who around 2009 had bought a muzzleloader gun to hunt and to go hunting with his grandson. So he had asked Gary about potential hunting areas. So Gary recommended a certain area. So a week goes by, and Gary's playing a 9-ball tournament with his friends at his friend's bar one night, and he's in the last game playing his buddy Vern for the championship. And the winner of the 9-ball tournament, Gary was telling me, gets $35. So in walks Rick, and he grabs Gary's shoulder as he's literally in motion to shoot the ball. And he said, I need to talk to you right now. And Gary goes on to explain that unfortunately Rick had lost his left leg in Vietnam. And Gary said he was a great guy. He kind of kept to himself, but that he was a great grandfather. Gary had asked him if he could finish the game, and Rick said, no way. I need to talk to you now. So it's about 9 p.m. It's dark. It's sprinkling rain. They walk outside to Gary's truck. Gary said that Rick looked very puzzled and confused, and he thought Rick was almost wanting to put a thumping on him. Rick explained that he took his grandson out to this area where he had recommended for him to hunt. And Rick had a 3/4-ton camper, and when they got there, they saw elk tracks everywhere, so they were really excited. The first night they were there, about 1 a.m. on the ridgeline, Rick was explaining, they heard extremely loud screaming, which understandably scared his grandson, who was 10 years old at the time. He said that it was so deafening they were forced to leave. They actually came back a second night because they were determined to get an elk. And so that second day, Rick took a shot at an elk but missed, but they stayed there planning to stay a second night. So here we go again, 1 a.m. roughly, this screaming. They said it was just so deafening, it forced them to leave a second time. They left in the middle of the night. So by this time, Rick's pissed. He's like, I'm not taking this. I want to hunt. I want to have a great outing with my grandson. So they go back a third day. And sometime before 1 a.m., when this, whatever it was screaming off the top of the ridgeline, Rick got his .45 caliber semi-automatic pistol with hollow points. He loaded his own ammunition. He took his poncho and he made his way up the ridgeline with his prosthetic leg late that third night. It was hard because of the terrain, and of course it was drizzling rain. It was cold, but he got up to the ridgeline, put his poncho on, and he leaned up against a tree and waited. He said that the screams were just so loud in the canyon the first 2 nights that it sounded like an old lady and an old man screaming through a bullhorn. And so here sits Rick, leaned up against the tree, sitting down. Rain pouring on him. It's cold, like I said. And he's got in one hand his gun and in another hand his cell phone. And so he said that he had been looking at his cell phone, watching the time, and that he had sprayed scent eliminator on him, smelling of pine, and just waited patiently. And then suddenly he heard a branch snap just feet away. And he told Gary that he saw a creature that stepped out just feet away. It was 10 feet tall, with chest and shoulders 5 feet wide, dripping with rain. The hair shimmered in the moonlit night, literally just right there in front of him. Rick told Gary that this thing was so big he felt just tiny. And this creature looked at him and then looked back at the camper, because you could see the camper about 100 yards down the ridge line through the trees. And so Rick stood up. It turned and faced him. And Rick, by this time, had his gun pointed right at it. And Rick said, "Listen, you're scaring my grandson. Can you please stop screaming? Once we kill an elk, we'll leave." And he said that he thought he was going to have to shoot. That this thing stood there face to face with him and just stared him down, not making a noise, not moving a flinch. He described to Gary that it stunk horribly. His gun had 7 bullets in the magazine and 1 in the chamber, and after about a minute of the stare down, it calmly walked off. Rick told Gary that he didn't think that he could hurt it with his gun, that it was just so massive that it likely wouldn't have killed this thing. It was just that big. And of course, we hear that a lot. And so that's why Lance carries a 500 Smith & Wesson. And it makes sense. So he watched it walk into the dense trees back up the mountain under the moonlight. And Ed waited until he felt that it was far enough away, and then he made his way back down the ridge line and returned to his grandson, who was sleeping in the camper. And nothing happened the rest of the night. The next morning, they got up and they killed an elk. It was the next day when he pulled Gary out of the bar and told him what happened. I mean, that's simply astounding, ladies and gentlemen, right? I mean, when Gary told me this, I was like in awe. And, it's only a no BS taking 45 pack and grandpa who simply loved his grandson enough to have a peaceful, successful hunt would have confronted such a beast. And I mean, he definitely had a pair. I mean, that's just amazing. One interesting thing about this is that, he called its bluff, right? It realized that it couldn't scare him off. So instead of physically attacking, it just walked off. I think most times folks have an encounter with the Bigfoot. We hear a lot of times of the grunts, the screams, the threatening postures, and certainly I think a lot of times there's bluffing that goes on. However, we know that's not the case all the time, right? I mean, if y'all listen to the past episode where the gentleman out of Florida, as a teenager, he was being chased by the auburn-colored Bigfoot. I mean, it was chasing him down, and you have to listen to that encounter if you haven't yet. But he would have been missing and dead most likely if it wasn't for his ability to scale that high fence in one bound. So it happens. I mean, Bigfoot's dangerous. That's no joke. Gary went on to explain his own terrifying encounter, and we're going to get into that in part 2, so stay tuned. Again, thank you so much for liking, subscribing, for sharing. We really appreciate all you listeners out there. So thanks again, and stay tuned to the next one.